Welcome to the Market Mindset. We are the hub for news, results, and CEO interviews focusing the junior commodities sector. We provide market analysis and perspective that will help position you for solid returns. If that sounds like something you're interested in, you can help support us by liking this video, subscribing to our channel, and clicking the notification bell. For more info, you can visit our website. All links are in the description below. Now let's get into today's video.
Good morning. Happy Friday. How are you doing, Austin?
Doing great. It's Friday. It's been a good week. We're looking forward to the weekend. We're looking forward to diving into some carbon economics here.
Yes. Well, this is, quite a topic. It's too huge. It's too big. So
Massive,
I'll give everyone, I'll just let people know this is extremely basic. It also assumes a large number of things. So what we're basing kind of this one video is just a very early start at looking at the sector. And it was from, it was the Goldman Sachs inaugural Carbonomics, they called it, or I've been calling it carbon economics, but it's Carbonomics conference they did with 30 CEOs, and there's about 5,000 investors there. And of course, it's all those buzzwords you hear, the sustainable investing in finance, looking at renewable power, which includes power generation, reimagining big oil. So there's a whole topic there, which includes hydrogen, looking at infrastructure, mobility, roads, driving, you name it, sustainability, circular economy from farm to fork, all of those key things, all those key terms you're hearing flying around under the term ESG. So that alone, just talking about what each one of those means is it's a huge show onto its own. And ESG is one all unto itself as well. We kind of talk about it here and there because it's such a huge buzzword, and it's being pushed aggressively by State Street, Vanguard, and of course BlackRock, who work with World Economic Forum and the UN. So these are the biggest money holders, movers and shakers, investment banks that are creating a new market. Essentially, that's what's happening here. So we're going to leave the entire discussion of the science of climate change and all of that, and we're just going to assume that everything is fact, and we're moving from there. So I know people get pretty pissed off because they go, well, let's talk about every step of this along the way can be challenged by someone, and that can become very tiresome. And I want to respect both sides of that, because I understand quite clearly there's two sides to this. When people say that the science is settled, it is absolutely not. There is some consensus on some of these issues, but also science by consensus isn't actually science. That's called politics. So we're taking all of that away and just looking at these movers and shakers that control the economy, they control the money, and they control the media to a large extent, in help with the UN, who frequently works with World Economic Forum, which is a whole video onto itself, have given this sector some wings, let's just say.
So we're just operating under the assumption that we're playing within the same guidelines as they would have when they set up this report, and everyone kind of analyzed it with the same idea in the back of their heads, and we're going to do the same. We're going to give it that kind of fair shot of assumption that we're operating under the same principles. Let's give it a go and dive into it.
And I think it's just so that people agree that yes, there's this push being made, and I think most people would say that yes, and then just remove the politics, remove your thoughts, and just go, it's happening. Yes, it's happening. And we talked about at COP26 how they've pledged $175 trillion towards this sector. So, and I think the world economy right now is 97 trillion. So then you look, when you start to get into this stuff, you start to read it, you go, well, you're creating a whole new sector out of thin air. So yeah, you can create a lot of wealth very quickly. And that's our position is, if they're doing it, this is going to sound terrible, I don't really care what their motives are. It's going to happen, and you have a chance to make some money. And that way, if we just look at it simply from, here's an opportunity to make some money for someone, regardless, let's start from that platform. So
Yeah,
maybe you can lead us
absolutely.
off. Maybe Austin, you can start off with this slide. I mean, this was a 68-page presentation. It's a pretty big one, and we're not going to get into every graph. It's too much. We will in our for our subscribers. We'll do a lot more detail and we'll provide some more solutions. But maybe you could kind of give us an idea of some of the main themes, starting off with, say, just the transportation sector.
Yeah, sure. So yeah, well, if we jump into the transportation sector first, it's analyzing how we need a revamped approach to the transportation industry, decarbonizing these technologies. So that'd be working under obviously aviation, shipping and marine. You'd be looking at road transportation, and you'd also be looking at long haul transportation. Special shout out to the truckers. You guys are doing a fantastic job.
Yes.
But yeah, so if we kind of break down each section, what can be done? How can you kind of look at improving each area? If we start with aviation, obviously, we can talk about moving to a more efficient aircraft model. It's kind of the general idea. Sustainable aviation fuel, would be included in that as well. And how can we balance between commercial air travel and the sort of just simply like shipping air travel? Can they be combined, or do they have to be separated out? What's the best approach with that?
Yeah, and there's a lot in there. And of course, there's lots of crossover between a lot of these as well. So if you're looking at aviation, they are actually working on electric planes. So there's that possibility. Of course, you're talking then about chemistry, and you're talking about the big oil and gas. How can they shift maybe hydrocarbons? How can they switch? Because there can be used hydrogen. Is there types of chemicals we could put in that make it more friendly? So that whole space is developing as well, that they can make types of fuel that would be more conducive to flying. I can speak specifically and directly to shipping. It was The Economist came out with an article, I'm going to say it's 2018, and they kind of stated, I believe it was 15 transportation ships, massive transportation ships, were, because they use bunker fuel, were responsible for about the same amount of carbon emissions as every car on the planet. So, and you're going, whoa, what? Now, we'll find that Economist article, and they're a pretty good source. So even if that's blown out of proportion, you said, okay, wow, that's too high. When I did a presentation on it years ago, and I did look into it, and it was, if it was not exactly that, it was very close to that. And you kind of realize, holy smokes, there's an opportunity there. Yeah. But that also kind of highlights the distraction of people going, let's focus on a car. You go, well, if you want bigger fish to fry, there's bigger issues than convincing people to buy an electric car. But like all things, any step forward with this process opens up the rest of it. And once again, I'm not arguing it's a good or bad thing. It's just, it's happening. So do you want to participate or do you not? And it also, if you believe that carbon is the issue, and to me, I consider all sorts of pollution, and they do take into account some other types of pollution in here. I just think it's very convenient that the investment banks and that they want to trade a product which they've designed, and they're still designing. We'll get into that as well, what the contract means, what the terms are. It's very convenient. Let me just put it that way. Because both of us are absolutely keen on people not polluting, but that includes dumping. That includes dumping waste in the water, plastics and whatnot, which that's not a North American issue. Those come from essentially India, China, and Africa. That's where most of the plastic pollution in the water. I know people would point and say, well, that's because we sell them the waste and then they dump it. So we're complicit in that. Maybe that's the case. I don't know. Yeah. You'd have to make that case and present it. But we know that it's where it's being dumped. So that whole decarbonization of transportation is massive.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and you break down into like kind of the long haul transportation side of things as well. You're looking at electric vehicles for trucks and stuff like that. Obviously, there's companies that we've looked at in the past that are working on something like that. Just to follow up on what you had said earlier about the ships from that Economist report, I did get it pulled up. It's from March 11th, 2017, and it does say that by burning heavy fuel and oil, 15 of the biggest ships emit more noxious oxides of nitrogen and sulfur than all the world's cars.
Okay. So slightly different. So I was off. It wasn't carbon that's burning, but but pollutants. I mean, it's
yeah, massive amount of pollutants.
Yeah. So once again, I don't necessarily care. Like, I'm not gonna say I don't care about the carbon. That's a whole separate issue. They're pointing out exactly the pollutants that they're putting out there, and that's what I'm more interested in. So, thanks for clarifying that for sure, and also clarifying. I mean, we're not just talking about cars like Tesla. Well, that's what everyone thinks. It's like Green Bus. They're a big bus company, and they make buses for cities. Every type of transportation system, whether it's snowmobiles. I remember Extra was working on power generation for snowmobiles for their electric components. This is that whole section, and I think in some way, no, we won't, because there's crossover when you go into buildings, because you're talking about the roads themselves and the buildings that we drive on. Those also have a component, but we'll leave that for a little bit further down the road here.
Yeah, absolutely. And one last thing before we jump into the next section as well, a potential kind of an earmarked move forward they have for the shipping industry in particular is clean ammonia run ships. Now, I don't know enough about the specifics behind that on how exactly that works and how they'd operate, but that's something they've identified as a very strong potential solution.
Yes, and I'm on that too. I mean, you can't use a lithium ion because there's potentiality for fire. I mean, it's small, and they're working on it. And there has been talk too that you could actually use a vanadium redox battery. That has been presented in some academic papers. So once again, it's crossover into like the next kind of thing we're going to talk about, power generation and storage. You can see all of these mesh together, to a large degree. Yeah. And when we're talking about power generation, so we'll switch quickly. They have here as being switched from coal to gas. Now, the irony to that is that you had everyone in the last year switch from gas to coal. or in the case of Germany, we're going to turn off all of the other power and go back to coal. So you can see, even when people say like these globalist elite and they're so smart, right? Like, nah, it's any of this like whole, like, and I like conspiracies as well. This, we're going to do this and that. You have to measure that with the fact that a lot of these people aren't that swift. And also to do massive undertakings on a global scale, very tough. So you can see already, and everyone knows how terrible coal is. But amazingly, last year, coal had an amazing year. It was used so much because, guess what? When you don't have a solution and you don't implement a policy or a strategy, and you turn off power, bad things happen.
You shut down all your nuclear reactors, you got nothing left to turn to. Yeah, you're firing up coal again.
And it's these types of events too that cause people to wonder what is going on. Like, is there a conspiracy? Are they purposely doing this? Or is it just that they're incompetent or what? And, there's lots of factors there. And I don't pretend to know. I mean, I don't. But we can see what they're trying to do, where they're trying to go. And that also doesn't mean they'll actually get there. But just the irony from, you'd think, okay, can we convince everyone to not use coal? Which I would say 2 or 3 years ago, they would have thought, yes, we can do that. Well, you failed immediately, very quickly already.
No.
But anyways, I don't want to be negative about that. It's just the irony. But this section of the power generation is where we spend a lot of time and we have a lot of interest, because you're talking a lot about the battery storage component to that. And that, once again, you're still talking about Tesla and your battery in your phone, your computer, everything, and people can relate to that.
Yeah, people absolutely can. And it's easier to wrap your head around, I think, especially over the last few years, because people become introduced to the Teslas and the electric vehicle side of things and are starting to understand more how these batteries work. I know certainly for myself, I understand a lot more about how these batteries work and how they're made than I did a year ago. And I think that's a general kind of flow in the general population is starting to see that as well. So you're wrapping your head around the concept a little bit better. And batteries, they obviously have earmarked as a key storage method. And how are we going to get massive amounts of energy to be stored in these batteries? And I know there's different minerals and stuff that come into play when we're talking about that, but that's a shift that clearly has to be something not just on the power generation side, it has to be on the power storage side as well.
Yeah, because a lot of this renewable means intermittent power. So if you're talking wind, you're talking or solar, obviously there's parts of the day, and there's also regions that are better than others. You want to be able to store that energy when it's going good. And if you only have, short window of being able to store it, and then it dwindles, you've lost a lot. So in a bright sunny day, then nighttime turns around, depending on the strength of your batteries and of your solar power panels. Once again, it can get complex very quickly, but the big part there is, can we store the energy? And we'll talk about some solutions later, but that is a huge component of this. Never mind, how are you originally generating this power anyway? Most green, say, I will take it exactly Colombia, a lot of their hydro is fueled by natural gas. So a lot of industry is still using, where's that power that you're getting that's clean? Where is it generated from? The really truly renewable, like solar and wind, is minuscule. It's very small. The amount of research and amount of technology and the amount of effort to get that up is massive. I'm not saying it can't happen, but it's a lot of research. It's a lot of work. And of course, we can put nuclear in here as well, which, as we've seen, China has gone full ahead with massive nuclear capabilities. 38, I think, new nuclear plants are scheduled for development this year alone. So let's just skip along, because I love the power and energy and battery storage. We talk about it a lot, but we'll skippy-doo over to agriculture quickly.
Yeah, and I think agriculture is one we probably won't spend too much time on, because obviously for anyone who follows along with the show, you know how huge into agriculture we are. You know the path that we see for it, and obviously with phosphorus solutions and stuff as well, but improved land management and livestock management processes. Now, the point I'll make about this is a really great idea if it's done the way I would want you to do it. And if we're talking about really going back to the roots of actual land and livestock management, I don't know if it's necessarily a great idea the way that the global elites of the power structure may think that they want to go forward with it.
Yes, and we can get into, I mean, because really what we're talking, the argument would be, like, people are slashing and cutting the Amazon in order to have massive livestock cattle farms because they can make more money off of doing that. So you're burning down and destroying part of the Amazon in order to make more money for your land per use, so that people can eat meat. And the global demand for meat would obviously be sky high, and you get into a whole myriad of conversations then of, people saying, I like meat, I want to eat meat. And then, of course, there's some health reasons to go, well, you don't need to eat that much meat. But this whole sector alone is massive. Cattle farming has a big impact on the environment. And there's always the kind of the flatulence argument, but it's real. It's true. There's also the fact of that land use. It does take, I mean, if you've seen, what's the town? Is it Bakersfield, California? Yeah. I mean, I wouldn't advise it, but if you do like a drone survey of that, it's gross. It's disgusting. It's horrible. Mm-hmm. And it might actually turn you off if you watch some of the shows of wanting to eat a lot of meat. But that does have an impact. I mean, and you can't argue that it doesn't. But once again, where that shifts into is people say, you can't tell me what I can and can't do, and what I can and can't eat, or why do you want to keep this country poor by not letting them? So you can see very quickly this becomes very complex.
It absolutely does.
Yeah, no. So, but we won't spend too much time here, because we're also we're talking about the angle of the transportation of how do you develop the crops, which, once again, a lot of fertilizer which you need for crops is natural gas. But also the phosphates, the nitrogen and whatnot that you need for growing food.
Yeah, and the last thing I'll kind of touch on as well is that a lot of what we're talking about, obviously, science is conflicting on different reports depending on where you look, but some of their approach would be a lot of this single crop farming in this massive spaces. There are some theories, especially on traditional agriculturist side, that don't like the idea of massive single crop farming either, and its potential negative effects on that specific area. So that's something to keep in the back of your mind as well when you're thinking about that.
I love that you brought that up. And there are actually, I can't stand Netflix. It's mostly propaganda. I just want to put that in there. But they did have a great show, and they were talking about that. They were talking about reclaiming the land and reclaiming the soil. Fascinating. And it is this idea that these huge globalist elite agri-farms may not be the swiftest, brightest, most impressive thing to do, to just have hundreds of miles of soy, farms.
Yeah.
Like that's not farming the way that I would grow up thinking, oh, someone's got a farm. Very few people now have a farm that they supply people with food. It's mostly a couple companies, and they do it on an industrial scale. And that is not what most people would envision a farmer looking like.
Yeah.
But that's a whole other conversation too. And I think some people, because there's been some good Netflix and some good documentaries, they can see that as well. That this massive scale farming, not so great. But let's just jump away. We'll go into buildings, which
let's pivot over to the decarbonization technologies for buildings and what the path forward with that's going to be. And the two main things that they've kind of earmarked for this, or they're saying heating and efficiency. So that's obviously efficiency improvements in the building of the building and in the energy retention of the building. And then heating is obviously going to be renewable electric run type of heating sources. What different sorts of carbon friendly heating methods are there out there?
Yeah, so we've touched on a little bit about this. We've talked about graphene having an impact on buildings, and this has a crossover with cement. You can see in the next industry and waste side, cement puts out a lot of carbon. So you kind of go, okay, well, if we can put graphene in here and we can also put hemp, we can cut these down and we make them stronger and lighter and whatnot. Very cool. There's technology out there we can use right now. Then I kind of point to people and go, all right, why aren't we? Like, if they're really serious, why aren't we doing it? Yeah. And that's, whenever I kind of say how much of this is really, they could be initiating these things right away. Let me just put it that way. But there's really cool things we can do. And then we're talking about ceramics and coatings as well, which also kind of sounds boring, but you think they could put coatings on windows that help reflect light, keep the building cooler. These things are not cheap. Like, obviously they're quite expensive. We're talking about nanotechnology and, chemical, chemistry on top of that, but very interesting what you can do for say with this building of the future. And they're doing this in lots of different places, and it's fascinating and it's really cool. And you can cut down your heating costs, you can cut down your air conditioning costs depending on the region you're in. And that efficiency is pretty outstanding, especially when you take it on a big scale. So there's lots of wiggle room there.
Yeah, absolutely. And you'll remember this, and I'm sure a lot of people who have listened to us before. About 6 months ago, we looked at a company, I believe the name of it was Sika, and it's based out of Switzerland. And they have a binding agent that's added to concrete that makes it stronger, more durable, and a better insulator for buildings. So there's solutions like that are out there. And one other thing I just wanted to highlight with this is you'll notice as we kind of worked across each of these sections, hydrogen is extremely key to the entire path of how they want to do this. And they've labeled clean hydrogen as being another massive, obviously energy source for a switch from like your conventional kind of gas boiler and stuff like that. But just an important thing to highlight is the use of hydrogen very clearly prioritized across this whole report.
Yeah, maybe we'll talk a little bit about that to wrap it up, because that last kind of box there, we've talked a bit about some of this. So cement and iron, steel, and petrochemicals. You can see these are the building blocks. So from your roads to your buildings, your bridges, all this infrastructure, and we see there's 1.3 trillion infrastructure in the Build Back Better plan. They've got money to spend, and I know in that bill, I think 6 billion was going towards as grants, so free money, just to battery storage. So that's small compared to the 1.3 trillion, but still, that can make a huge impact on a lot of companies. And they're sending these grants in packets or bundles of 50 million to 100 million. So you can imagine if you're a junior and you're working and you have some technology and you can prove to a US grant agency, we've got something, and we've got something for the US, you've got to pitch it. Yeah. And you're a junior and you can get an influx of 50 million from a grant, which is free and doesn't affect your capital structure. That's a huge win. Like you can start to see, you can start to see how, okay, you can get money into some of these companies that otherwise you try to put 50 million into a penny stock, you're going to blow out that share structure pretty quick. You can see ways of getting money into a company now. And I know lots of people are going to scream and go, oh, it's now you're working with the government and this and that. People are already doing that anyway. So, we're already too far down this path that, you know, when we're restructuring, rebuilding everything, I don't think you're going to have a future vision where the elites that run things are going to say we have no impact or say in that. So not to be negative, but this whole kind of section. Go ahead.
I'd hate to break the heart of the traditional laissez-faire economist out there, but the government hands off the economy is long dead, and we have to just accept that at this point.
It hasn't existed for a very long time, and even then, you could argue that really did it. I mean, government and getting your regulations, getting them approved one way or another, that's always gone on. There's been a tie together for a long time. This, I think people are offended because it's so embedded. Like this is literally someone in Brussels saying, we're telling you how you can run your business. And that, yes, I get it. That's frustrating. It's a level of acknowledgement, not only that we kind of know behind the scenes, there's the back room meetings. Now it's out in the open and it's like, well, we don't like that. That's a whole other conversation as well. So we won't even touch that. But once again, we're just kind of letting you know it's there. Now, this other section, actually maybe kind of touch on hydrogen before I finish off here.
Well, the key with hydrogen is just how involved it can be. And if you look at, they do a little breakdown of their cost curve technology additions to each of these sectors. The only one where they don't mention hydrogen specifically is under agriculture, under each of these 5 sections. So obviously when it comes to industry and waste, they're looking at hydrogen for a full kind of decarbonization of, moving the process of developing iron and steel to hydrogen based, right?
Yes.
Or clean hydrogen petrochemicals that can aid with the decarbonization process of actually getting the raw materials out of the ground and produced and used for all these different types of technologies.
Yeah, and that's going to be a massive factor, and I'm glad you brought that up because even in that report, I think they had put that's about 40% of a factor that they thought hydrogen would have an impact. And remember, all of these could come together. Like whenever they talk about this electric future, it's not like everybody's going to have some sort of electric car. They might have a hydrogen car. They might have all different types. But it's just kind of highlighting that they're definitely switching. So you can fight against it, and that's fine. But we're just presenting there's opportunity to make money following what their lead. And the last part, I just want to leave it on because once again, this is a whole other topic unto itself, is the scaling of the voluntary carbon markets. So when people talk about, all right, let's talk about cap and trade. Let's talk about trading carbon. That's fairly small right now. And people kind of know what's going on there. And I'll just throw out as a highlight. Last quarter of 21, was the fourth quarter 21 or third quarter? Tesla made, I think, 500 million or 450 million just simply on their credits. So that's an awful lot of money for selling your credits. So that's split up into like a voluntary market where you can trade with other companies, but there's also just credits you can get from the government for running net zero. This topic is complex. Just like ESG, people can't agree necessarily very well globally on what's the criteria in the contract that works fine. They tried to push it back in Kyoto and people just dodged all around it. You can understand if you try to get people on board for just the environmental part, not even the social and governance, S&G, just on what they agree scientifically on the environment part, that has not come to any agreement. They're trying to still do that to then make a contract that you can then trade. And once those have been set and all agreed upon, then the market is very robust and can grow. And I think they're thinking that it could grow by 30 times by 2030. I mean, it's huge. So it's one of these, it's developing. It's going to get bigger. It's going to take a lot more work. But we're going to get into this, for our subscribers in detail and present some companies that are doing things and some of the exchanges and how someone could get into this. And we are looking at like say the blueprint for this is McKinsey has a great piece on this voluntary carbon market. This is a place that is going to grow. There's without a doubt. And this whole sector is going to grow. We know it is. And so we want to kind of just introduce and just highlight some of the key terms. And then we'll do shows on each one of those terms alone. And we really want to encourage you to have like a bit of an FAQ and some questions back and forth, engage on this. Once again, trying to take away some of the politics part, because that's where things get heated. And also we're making very big assumptions. I know. We're only looking at where can someone make some money.
Yeah, exactly. We're just trying to identify the opportunities and where these go. And like you said, we've kind of wrapped this all up into a little half-hour presentation here. We could spend another half hour diving into each of these sections easily, talking about the different opportunities there. But yeah, this was just to kind of introduce people to the idea, kind of get the key terms out there, identify what the different areas that they're earmarking for, what are going to be some of the key focuses. Obviously, I think hydrogen is going to be a big player in that, but there are a bunch of other, different minerals and methods involved as well. So just kind of getting the overview out to people and then we're going to dive into identifying how you can make some money out of this.
Perfect. Well, everyone, have a great weekend. We're glad you joined us, and send us some of your thoughts and suggestions.
Yeah, thanks, everybody. Take care.